Fabulous with Vips and Vicky. The ThinqShift podcast for professionals who aspire to be fabulous leaders. Those who not only succeed, but also purposefully seek to reinvent the world.
Welcome, everybody. It's so good to be back. The series that we've designed for you this time round is to help fabulous people think through complex things and to provide our fabulous perspective. We were inspired by this notion that it's so easy to think there are easy solutions to really complicated things. And then we get annoyed when our bosses, our organizations, and even each other, when these things aren't easy and they don't get solved or moved on and we have completely different opinions about them. It leads to frustration. And as fabulous people, the goal is not to get frustrated so easily. Why is that, you may ask? Well, one of our non-negotiables, which we shared in an earlier episode, is to have an inside-out mentality, which means you see yourself as part of the solution as opposed to pointing fingers to all of those around you. It's really easy to have a simple answer to a complex problem. We all need to get much better at operating in the grey than the black and white. And we're going to take a few topics and do this, and we'll be asking you to provide your views on this, and also if there are topics you'd like us to explore that are inherently complex, and to provide our fabulous perspective. Today's episode is focusing on, well, why don't we just make a rule and then everybody follows it? Well, if only it was that easy. So the topic we're going to look at through that lens is, so many employees are wondering, in the pandemic, we all worked remotely. It worked great. We proved the productivity stats. We were so much happier not having the commute in so many instances. Why can't we work remotely forever? So Vips, this is a really interesting question. I mean, we do have all the data now after years and years and years of working remotely about how much more productive people are in general. There are edge cases where it's not the case. We have so much more flexibility. We can put on a load of laundry between meetings. We can go pick up the kids after school. We can take the dogs for a walk. We can do all of that and all our work. And yet there's so much pressure to come back into the office. Vips, what is your view on all of this?
It's good to see you again.
It's great
good
to
do
see
these
you
again. It's been a while since we did these, and it's kind of fun to be back. Yeah, it's you sounded so professional in your intro. It kind of took me by surprise. I think your question's great though. You know what? I challenge the assumption on that. Really, I don't know that we have got tons of data to say it works well. I just think that we have tons of data to show that it works well for certain categories of people, and I think it's also one of these things. I also think we also want it to work. I mean, I sit here. I want it to work remote. I like being remote most of the time. I think there's we've got to be a bit careful that we're not I guess selecting the data that kind of talks to what we want to hear most, which I guess is the challenge of our age. But also, I think this particular topic, just because you're getting all your tasks done doesn't mean you're being productive. Maybe there's a whole bunch of tasks that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing. Maybe the tasks that you should be doing aren't the ones that are likely to give you the greatest growth or the greatest promotion prospects or the greatest greatest progression towards other goals you may have. And I think part of this is everyone is trying to recalibrate at an employee level. People is trying to recalibrate. We hear about it through phrases like the future of work and so forth. Well, I think people are just trying to recalibrate how do people participate as employees in the economy, and how does that change? And to me, the return to work is one thing, but we're going to tackle in other episodes as well. We got things like, all right, so what's AI going to do to some of these jobs and so forth as well? So I think it's better to look at this sort of thing as not so much binary, but like a progression. Where are we right now, and why is it evolving? Why is it changing? And what are the factors that that are at play that make something that seems like it should be really easy? Why don't we just let people work wherever they want to work, whenever they want to work, so long as they're getting their work done? That is just. I wish it was that simple, but it's not.
So Vips,
And I think that's probably what we should get into.
I'm gonna challenge you there for a minute. So imagine you talking to me and I process invoices all day. I get them paid,
Yeah,
or I write code. And I'm there to get a whole bunch of code out every single day, or I've got to enter a whole bunch of data into a healthcare system. There are a whole bunch of jobs that literally require bums on seats, literally, and getting through just a huge amount of velocity and volume of stuff, and anything that takes you away from that tends to be a distraction. And there are a
yeah,
number and a volume of jobs that are like that. And so if I'm that employee, that's my job. I'm being measured. Every
yeah.
month I produce, there are a number of cases I have to do. There are a number of things that I have to produce. It's measured that way through the organization. That's what the organization looks at. Help me understand why I should care about all these other dimensions when, frankly, my job is that it's pretty straightforward in terms of a productivity outflow.
Yeah, sure. If your work is transactional in that way, then I don't think you do need to consider that. So long as you have limited expectations in terms of career progression, as long as you have limited aspirations in terms of future income, and those are likely to be the kinds of jobs also that get increasingly automated and just go away. So I guess if that, if you're looking at it as a job rather than part of a career, and your job happens to be very transactional and processing, sure, you don't need to care. But then what you are going to find, that the flip side then is gonna be, so I'm playing devil's advocate now and probably wind up a number of people that are listening to this. All right, so consider then, let's say I'm do that invoice processor, okay, and I'm earning whatever, 30, $40 an hour or whatever it is, $50 an hour, $20 an hour, $30 an hour, whatever it is. I'm earning a certain amount of money to do that role, and I'm doing it remotely. Okay, then what's happening then from an employer's perspective? Okay, I am now seeing productivity purely through the transaction throughput of this person doing these tasks. Agreed?
Agreed.
I'm not seeing any external benefits. I'm not seeing how pleasant they are and how they contribute to the spirit of the team. I'm not seeing them engage in other activities and adding value in other dimensions that may not be directly part of their work product. Agreed?
Agreed.
Because I'm not there, right? I'm at home doing my thing, and I'm busy going to the gym, or I'm busy doing the school pickup, or and these are all legitimate things. I'm not saying they're bad, okay? Or maybe I've got elderly care responsibilities. Maybe I need more flexibility. Maybe my commute's very long. I get it, okay? I'm not diminishing it, but think about what happens from an employer's perspective. They are learning to treat you as a truly transactional commodity, okay? Now, at that point, it doesn't really matter if you're 10 miles away or 10,000 miles away. So now I have the ability to get that processing done in, I don't know, pick your country: Peru, Chile, India, China, um, for a fraction of what you're earning today. Okay, and if the work is truly that transactional, then I mean, effectively, by digging my heels in on the remote work thing, I'm probably contributing to me being unemployed sooner.
Mm, that's a very interesting perspective.
And that's before we talk about AI that probably blanket away loads of these things over the next 5 to 10 years anyway. So I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be fatalist or scare anyone. That's not what I'm trying. I'm just trying to say that just because you want it and it improves your quality of life doesn't mean that you're also not creating the conditions for your job to go away.
Okay. So I'm kind of bought into that now as that kind of employee. So what else can I be thinking
But
about then
yeah, but
beyond?
hold on. But before I go there, because I sound like a bit of an arsehole now, right? And
Just a little, just a
I do
little
want to
bit.
put it out there, right? I do want to put it out there, right? That I do get it, right? There's so many dimensions that have been positive about remote working. Okay, I mean, in many cases, people are still scared about health concerns about being infected, particularly those who are vulnerable, who have preconditions that could be particularly exacerbated by things like COVID.
Or
Okay.
family
Um,
members at home with those kind of issues.
Family members at home who may be susceptible, so forth. Okay, people may also have experienced more burnout through COVID or just generally in their lives. And having that extra flexibility does allow them to cope better and ultimately lead to, you know, a more refined definition of a productive employee. Okay. Um, you're going to do great in engagement scores, right? Because generally people want to think that their employees are flexible and they can work when they want to work and so forth. So all of these things are going to improve. I think you're right. Transactional productivity will go up for sure. Um, if you live where you live, commuting's a huge deal. You get hours in your day back. Um, you know, maybe slightly less of an issue for me, but I get it.
Plus all the ancillary road rage and all the blood pressure raising that comes along
Sure.
with sitting in traffic for hours and hours.
Sure. Sure. So, I mean, there's lots of good stuff about it, right? But there are also, you know, you just got to think of it. There's also, you know, some downsides to it too. I mean, even things like how do you get people to be more tolerant of other employees if they don't know each other? I know for a fact that I'm a lot more tolerant with you because I've worked with you for 20 something years. But if I worked with you for 20 minutes, I probably wouldn't be as tolerant and you probably wouldn't be as tolerant with me. And so there are, you know, these are human characteristics that don't just go away because we want to work from home. We know the way we develop trust in other human beings has a lot to do with proximity.
Yeah, and
And it's hard. It's hard to do that.
shared experiences and learning all about what people's
Yeah. How do I
intentions.
learn about someone else's culture if I'm not exposed to it?
Yeah,
If I'm sitting at home in my little studio here in Atlanta, okay, and that's all I see, how the hell do I have perspective of someone who lives in California or someone who lives in New York or someone who lives in London or someone who lives in Spain or someone who lives in, I don't know, pick your country or pick your state or Idaho or whatever. Indiana. I just saw they were in like 3 feet of snow or something. Okay. How do I do that?
yeah,
And then at the same time, by the way, we're telling everyone that we need to be more inclusive, we need to be more compassionate, we need to be more integrated. How does that work if you're cocooning yourself off in your little work land by being remotely as well, right? I mean, it's a complex topic.
yeah.
And that's just from the employee's perspective.
Okay. Well, what other perspectives should we consider, Vips?
Well, I guess all right, let's take the employer. That's the classic next one, and then we'll go even higher. I mean, let's think about the employer. What do you think from an employer's point of view? So we touched on some of those already. I hit the one around, you could employee retention satisfaction becomes harder to do if people are fragmented. You often have to create new policies, new procedures, new ways of working. These are business change projects that take time. They take money. They take often. Yeah, and people don't remember. Most people want to do the work that they want to do and change the way they want to change, but they really expect most people to change to suit them. We don't like things changing too much.
Mm-hmm.
Most employees don't. They just want things to change they don't like. They don't want things to change that they do like. And so you got that challenge. What about health and safety? Okay. Do you remember we used to talk a lot about office ergonomics? If I'm going to be sitting at a desk all day,
Oh
I
yeah,
need
yeah,
super ergonomic chairs
yeah.
and all that kind of stuff,
It's
right?
still a big deal in large
It's still a real thing. Of
institutions.
course it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Of course it is. But that gets way more complex if your people are everywhere. And you might have different laws in different states or in different countries or different expectations about what's available, what's possible, what's not possible. Um, Even things like temperature, heating, right? All of those sorts of things. So you got those sorts of things, I think, that have real costs, but they also just add to the complexity of your labor um, management, if you like. What about office spaces? What a nightmare! Anyone walk around New York, and it's still a nightmare. We got so many companies with tons of office space when a tiny fraction of people in them, irrespective of whether they've been asked to go back to work in the office or not. Okay, so we're paying many from an employer's perspective, and you've seen it. Many firms have reduced their footprint. So then you reduce your footprint because you think you don't need it, and then you start getting everyone back to the office, and suddenly you realize you do need it, right? So I mean, it's just absolute carnage from from that perspective. What about things like productivity and performance metrics? How do you measure someone's attitude as opposed to their transaction throughput? How do you do that when most people want to be on Zoom calls, be off video while they do their emails in the background because they think they're being more productive? How does that work?
Yeah.
How does training work? Not just like your technical people don't like e-learning. We know that, right? They just try to click through the slides as quickly as possible and pray, even though we put like timers on them now. Sophisticated e-learning, and you have to spend 45 seconds on this and watch this video, otherwise you don't get credit. Okay. So you watch the video while you're having your lunch or doing something else, and then you go back and you answer 4 questions, and then you move on. You haven't learned shit. It's a compliance thing. Okay. And so we actually want to develop people. It's hard to develop people without actually talking to them, without being with them, without working with them. Right. And that's a lot. That's just a lot. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just a lot harder to do remotely. And that requires the person to have to put more effort into it. And the whole reason why they like remote in the first place is they don't have to put more effort into it. So, I mean, it's complex, you know?
Yeah.
So I got a lot of empathy for employers and employees on this one, because I think whatever anyone does, you're in our classic top-notch executive land in ThinqShift terms, where your job becomes keeping everyone equally miserable, not to keep anyone happy, because it's just not possible to keep a sufficient cross-section of folks happy, because we're trying to optimize for one every time, and that becomes really inefficient.
Yeah, and Vips, we're also seeing that new people joining the workforce, some have never worked in an office before. I did a session with somebody. She'd been working for 3 years, never been in an office. It's like, what happens in offices? And it was, think about that. You're building up a new workforce who have never learned the nuances of working together in an environment, and beyond the daily tasks. How do you problem solve together? How do you work through the other elements that are moving the organization forward? Because you can't just keep doing the same thing. Otherwise, it will get transactional and have those kind of challenges. But how do you keep moving forward on the bigger problems that are harder to do collectively remotely?
Well, yeah. How do you even engage on the bigger problems?
Yeah.
How do you even know who you should have in the room? How do you know who's leaning in, who's not leaning in? There's a lot of these subtle things that are really, really tricky. The other thing I saw with that was really interesting with one of my clients was because they'd never worked in an office before, they felt that coming to the office was taking a pay cut, and they needed to be compensated for taking a pay cut, because now they had to pay for the travel costs of
For
whatever,
parking.
parking, fuel, whatever. Okay. And that they experienced that as income being taken away from them. Okay. Which, if you think about it, if you knew the world before that, you couldn't imagine that. Okay. But if you think of, if you've never known anything else, and you've got whatever 2-3 years worth of a disposable income that's suddenly being hit with whatever it is, a couple of $100 a month for commuting, and suddenly it's going to feel like a couple of $100 pay decrease.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Do you pay them? Do you pay them more? To incite, is that right? What about the people that came back for the same money then? Do you have to pay them up as well? And so you get into this kind of inflationary, it's what I mean by no matter what you do, what about all the executives that we allowed to go everywhere that now all the CEOs want back? Right? That's a great one. So now you think about what happens there. I took this job on the basis that I could work from everywhere. Okay. And then those people, particularly if they're executives, typically have hired other people, right? They've built teams of people, or they've brought in people that they've worked with in the past. And now suddenly you've hired an entire team of people, normally in middle or senior management levels, that are all used to a different psychological contract with their employer at the point at which they join. Policy changes, you want people back in the office 3 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever, for whatever reasons. Okay. And now suddenly you've got, a type of civil war that isn't just, the lower level jobs that you were talking about earlier, but now you've got critical leadership or management infrastructure inside your company rebelling. What disaster. That's why no one's really forced it.
Yeah. And I want to take you to another place before we go into the other levels, because I know you've got other perspectives. But there are large organizations, large banks, large tech companies that have been solely remote for decades before all of this happened, and they've figured it out.
Yeah. But they're also losing tons of jobs.
They figured out how to do all these things.
Right? I mean, I think it's really dangerous to use big tech as role model examples.
Well, not just big tech, big banks,
Yeah,
the large institutions, they've all
yeah.
gone through
But
this.
I don't know that they have figured it out. I think what actually happens, I mean, if you say figured it out, I'll tell you what really happens. People look at the value that's being provided across their business chain and they figure out the things that can be done effectively remotely. And over time, they become jobs that effectively are outsourced jobs. We used to call them outsourced jobs. Now we just call them remote jobs. Okay. But know that the minute you're in that kind of game, ultimately your leadership progression, if that's important to you, okay, your leadership progression will tail off. You're paying for that flexibility through the access to the experiences and the skills that you need to accumulate in order to have more senior roles.
Yeah.
Or you have to spend a lot more of your time then traveling to events, a lot more time traveling to give yourself the opportunities to not just engage with senior people inside your organization, but across the industry and so forth. So it's not. I think it's doable, but then you're probably still going to require a fair amount of travel, just for a different purpose.
Yeah.
But before we move on, though, Vicky, you and I, we've been doing organizational culture since I don't know, I can't even remember anymore. Since I had black hair, okay, and 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 lots of it, right? And
But Vips, you're so much more distinguished looking now.
well, I distinguish. I'll take that. Thank you. Right, but just think about it. Right, the holy grail is for organizational culture to be aligned with the business and people happy being there. That's always been the holy grail because that's what gives you performance and flexibility. Okay. It's really, I mean, just think about the effort that you and I have had to put in to organizations, our own organizations that we've been part of, but also with our clients over the years. It is a tremendous amount of legwork to build strong, adaptable culture. Would you
Yeah,
agree? Right.
absolutely.
So if everyone's remote, or even a fraction, 50% of your staff is remote, does that make that job easier or harder? You tell me.
So much harder. So much
Yeah, how
harder
much harder?
because,
It's like 10%. We're talking
oh,
orders of
no, no, no.
magnitude.
It would almost be impossible to take on a task like that and have any real chance of success. Because even when you try and do it in the office, it's really, really hard because the kind of the political capital you have to expend to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd tackle it, to be honest, if everybody was remote.
But then we create initiatives inside corporate environments saying we need to do more for belonging. How the hell is that? So we just come up with new language
Yeah.
that recognizes the symptoms.
And we saw that, Phipps, during COVID when everyone did all the happy hours and all the different games and things. But after a while, everyone's like, I don't want to go to those anymore. They're fun a bit in the beginning, but after a while, they're like, okay, we know what we're trying to do, but it's not having the result that we were
You
hoping
grow
for.
apart. You grow apart. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, forget work. I live in the States now. As you know, my family's in London. Most of my family's in London. Okay, I still call them frequently, but I'm definitely. It's not like I'm there anymore.
Yeah.
And it changes the relationship I have with my sisters. It changes the relationship I have with my nephews and nieces and so forth. Now, if I want to keep that going, it's so much extra effort because I don't get anything for free just by being there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
I have to make the time. I have to make the time in my calendar. After I finish this podcast recording with you, guess what I do? I end up calling my three sisters. I have to schedule it. It's now work product rather than, oh, we just happened to meet for coffee and we had a good chit chat and I found out what's going on in her life and what's going on with my nephew. And it's really good. I didn't even know that they were working on this. This is all the stuff that, humans need some of this for their own. We're not going to stop being social creatures just because we have social media and Slack and Instagram, right? That doesn't compensate for true relationships. I know we like to say it does, but it doesn't really.
I love that soundbite. We don't stop being social just because of social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Vips, I need to move us on.
All right.
Let's go through the next levels. What else are you thinking of as we think about the complexity of this?
Well, I guess, obviously, we spend a lot of our time, coaching and working with senior C-suite people. So, from their perspective, if I'm in the C-suite, I need flexibility of my people, particularly my core talent. it's very hard for me to build flexibility. I don't mean in terms of like people being available. I mean like for them to understand and be able to detect what's going on in almost real time inside the organization and how I'm feeling and the things I'm working on and our mid-range, short-term, long-term plans. And I need the flexibility to have those kind of uh, uh, to be able to see how people are evolving and growing and changing. And I need that. I need that. And it's very hard for me to do that if I don't know my people that intimately, particularly my core leadership team. And so I do think that that need for flexibility is kind of forcing this motivation to get people, at least leaders, back into some kind of congregated area. And I think we proxy it through things like improves innovation time, but it also just I think it's meant that communications just have to be so much better. Just getting your work done isn't good enough. It's how it's how you communicate effectively. It's so much more overhead that I
Yeah.
think leaders are feeling, and they don't want to do that. Like it feels like they've got too much of that already. How do they? They're dealing with shareholders, they're dealing externally, they're dealing with the market, and the more distributed my team is, the more time and energy I'm going to have to give to communication of my leadership team, and maybe I just don't have that, right? So that's a
Yeah.
that's a change that I think they have to really wrap their heads around. And I'm seeing many leaders actually just opt out. I don't know that I want to be a leader in this kind of age.
Well, Phipps, as you describe that, this visual of when you're in an environment together, there's like a golden thread that connects you all. And you intuitively understand all the complexities and the changing dynamics and the sentiment and how things are morphing. And if you're not in that environment, you've lost all of that. And now you're relying on formal, informal communication channels, but that gives you data, it doesn't give you the sentiment and the feeling and everything else. And you can easily be perceived as missing the bigger picture of what's required. And you could be coming at it from, but look at my productivity, look at my stats, and look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
my, but you're
yeah.
missing the whole optics and perspectives and nuances of the senior level relationships that are inherently built when you're together. It's almost impossible to build when you're apart.
Right. And so then now you get to you hear this all the time in leadership circles. We don't have good alignment. Okay. The price of poor alignment is measured in billions. Okay. In terms of economic productivity.
Yeah.
Okay. It's measured in billions. Okay. How the hell are you going to get aligned if you're interacting predominantly via electronic communication? You don't get it for free.
And if you're doing a million things
And you're doing a
on
million
the
things.
side,
And you're doing a
yeah.
million things. Right. And then also, by the way, how often have you heard people who want to be remote, normally middle to senior management, I don't know what our strategy is. I don't know that I understand our direction, right? They're not after a piece of paper. They just don't feel it, right? With the poor CEO, don't think you should ever feel too sorry for CEOs. But let's say in this scenario, the poor CEO is like, hold on a second. We've written it down. We've done offsites. I've talked about this till the cows come home. I've said it 400 times. These people must be stupid. Why don't they? Why can't they? How else do I communicate to these people? And the communication isn't the problem. It's the internalization is the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And the internalization, I think, doesn't really happen without proximity because of all the things you just said.
Yeah.
And there's a heavy price for that. The problem with a lot of this stuff we're talking about, Vicky, is you can attribute a price, the cost of it in macro terms, but you can't attribute a price to it in micro terms. And that means that it's hard to create a specific KPI and say we're going to do these things and we're taking this because it's going to benefit us to the tune of whatever X million dollars or whatever it is. You can't, that direct correlation isn't there in such a clean way. And I think that's partly what causes um, this kind of disconnect that I think a lot of people are experiencing at the
And
moment.
that's why people go down to productivity measures. And I'm so much more
Yeah,
productive because it's an easy one to go to.
but then you're also from a leadership point of view. Okay, I think we're in a period, particularly in the United States, where the whole concept of being more inclusive is very much on the it's a key fabric of the narrative of leadership in corporate America at the moment. And whether you're for it, whether you're against it, it's on the agenda. However you look at it. Okay. Well, just consider what. Okay, so if now most people don't argue with the principle that you should hire the best person to do a job, right? Most people don't. Most people wouldn't argue with that. Or you should. Or now consider What we're talking about now is not your transactional work throughput of that invoice processor you talked about earlier, but we're talking about the nuance and the ability to track to what's going on. These are not things you can measure as specific work product.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're going to be much more driven by trust, relationships, how well you know someone, all of these kind of factors. Okay, now if I'm in a situation where, let's say I'm a new executive, I'm a new CIO or a new CTO or a new head of engineering or a new CEO or a new COO or a CFO, okay? And I have this distributed remote group, okay? I'm gonna feel like I can trust no one, okay? So guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna hire a new team, or at least a couple of lieutenants that I can trust. Guess where they're gonna come from?
People I've worked with before.
People I've worked with and people I know, right? And how is that gonna help the diversity problem?
Yeah, it's not.
It's not. Okay. And so, but we don't really want to, we want to be able to, have our cake and eat it in every side. And I just think there's some hard choices to be made here. Not choices, but hard consequences. I just don't think, when we're sitting at home, not wanting to travel an hour to work each way or sit in an office for 3 days a week or whatever it is, we don't think about these things. And I guess most people don't have to, but I would suggest fabulous people and fabulous leaders do, because otherwise you just get frustrated, and ultimately that shows up in your own growth and your own career acceleration.
So, Vips, what are the levels to think about before we go through, or like, what do we do with all this?
Oh gosh, you want to go even higher? All right. Well, I mean, yeah, okay. So let's go right to the top then. I mean, I don't think there's too many people, too many employees out there think about this in sort of geopolitical or geoeconomic um, sort of perspectives. So consider, okay, that when you have these kind of trends, then whether you believe it's an up or a down, if you sort of aggregate up to a national level, then it's going to be some kind of impact on national productivity, however you look at it, up or down. Okay, so you might find some countries embrace something more than the others, or some countries less than the others, and you're going to find that the competitiveness of whatever it is that you sell or do, whatever your business does, your product or your service, might become uncompetitive relative to somewhere else, or it might become more competitive. One way or the other, it could have an impact. But if you start thinking about that from the consequence of this topic, but plus things like increased automation, coming wave of AI, and so forth, you're going to see big winners and big losers. And not just big winners and losers in terms of companies, you're going to see big winners and big losers in terms of countries, cultures, political systems. Okay. All of which are affected by something as simple as return to work policies. Okay. What about global talent distribution? I mentioned earlier that if I train if my company's system, my organization system can handle more people that are remote more often, then I'm more likely to get more stuff done where it's cheapest. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's going to absolutely impact employment levels. That's going to, it's going to trigger unionization and all sorts of things that are going to happen at a sort of political level. Okay. What about things like it damages what's called external economies of scale? So, Silicon Valley, as an example for technology, has massive external economies of scale because everything there is built around tech. So it's easy from a talent perspective. You can shift, you can change, and everyone's talking about it. So you benefit from the external infrastructure of all of that. But if all of that gets distributed, then there's going to be winners and losers geographically. That's going to impact things like state policy. It's going to impact things like incentives, tax structures, immigration potentially, in terms of what you need and what you don't need. And so, I know that sounds like really lofty. What I'm saying is there's a direct line of sight to those things that when we're thinking about it from our own micro perspective, we don't know or care about. But some poor sod is having to think about that, whether that's at a government level or a state level or a policymaker level or a think tank level or a CEO level or a CFO level. Someone somewhere is either thinking about it, having to react to it, or or winning or losing, which is having, which will have impact on even things like, what we're good at as a country and what we're not good as a country, which ultimately will affect things like taxes, interest rates, all of these sorts of macro things that most of us don't ever really worry about or think about because we think it's outside of our sphere of control or influence, but we do all contribute to that. And I think this one is a big one because there's so much changing in relation to what work is and what constitutes valuable work. It's kind of being attacked from so many areas that there will be huge winners and losers from an overall employment market point of view, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And it's a bit of a race from that perspective in terms of trying to be on the winning side of that argument over the next 5, 10, 15 years, which will obviously have huge impacts on us individually as well, but also for our businesses and the country. And some would go further, even our way of life. If you want to take it all the way, if you want to take it all the way to that level, I mean,
Existential, yeah.
yeah. And it doesn't. I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just saying all of these things are connected, and I don't know that. I think fabulous people should spend a little bit more time trying to understand the complexities before digging their heels in too quickly.
Yeah, no question. So Vips, you've given us a really great perspective of not only a narrow perspective as an employee, but given a broader perspective, taking it up through the employer, the organization, the wider world, geopolitical views as well. Lots of food for thought. So let's wrap it up and bring it back to, so what do we do with it? Like, what are the options and choices we can make here and the consequences of those?
Yeah.
In a simple way. In a simple way.
Yeah, it depends on kind of like who you are, which actor you are in this particular play, if you like. I'll probably answer that one from an employer's perspective. Okay, I think the first piece of advice I would give before I speak to options is probably recognize that you really have to look at it through the lens of what's appropriate for your kind of organization. And in simple terms, I think there's going to be leadership will that makes a choice, and it tends to go in, broadly speaking, one of three directions. It's going to be the we're going to double down on what the employee wants perspective. Okay, and that's the go for our people, our most important thing, our most important asset. We need them to be happy. We are going to market differentiate on that basis, and that's kind of option one. And I'll get into kind of who that works for in a second. Option two is you go the other way and you say, this is so complex, and no matter what I do, I'm going to be wrong anyway. I'm going to pull us back towards something that looks like is relatively standardized. And that's going to feel more like everyone's going to be back in the office 3 days a week or 4 days a week, or you'll have to earn your right to be remote, or it works well for certain roles, but doesn't work well for certain other roles. If you don't like it, tough. So it's a bit of it's a bit of a hard line, if you like, of handling it. And that's kind of your sort of your other extreme. And then you've got the middle option, which is really sort of wait and see and kind of follow the best practices as they emerge from what other people are doing. And that's the one that I think most organizations tend to go for. Okay, so if I pick the first one, the kind of the optimize, differentiate on for the employee, I think that only really works for high margin businesses that are quite small, because or where the talent is super scarce. Okay, and and when you have those factors, I think that model works because it's not like you can get that talent anywhere else. So you may as well
Mm-hmm.
optimize for it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't work at scale. So it's typically going to be in small organizations. I think that approach is probably the right approach from an employer perspective. The other side is probably going to is the harder line, if you like. It's probably going to be more for your organizations that are large, but do need to change quickly because, they're susceptible to whatever technology disruption or market changes, or they are volatile. They're struggling
Yeah.
with a volatile
Changing labor
world.
conditions.
Changing, yeah, all of that stuff, right? And those will probably go the hard side because they need things to be more ordered. Okay. And
Yeah.
being ordered and controlled is a better path to efficiency than optimizing for individual effectiveness,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Okay.
Totally.
And that, so, I think you're seeing that with most of the large cutting edge type of companies that are finding themselves at a bit of a juncture in terms of what happens next. Okay. And then I think you've got the middle crowd. The middle crowd tend to be your institutions. They're your, they're always going to be around your utilities, your educational establishments, your your yeah, they're just always going to be there. Okay. And so from their perspective, they can't go too hard line, right? They can't go too soft either. Soft meaning too individualized either, because that doesn't work. And so I think what happens there is you're in for kind of a game of wait and see, experiment, and really minimize friction. And the problem with that is you're kind of stuck with the perception that you're not showing good leadership because it feels like you're blowing in the wind. You're not being
Yeah.
clear. You're doing something for
Wishy-washy.
one team, but not another team. Why are you doing it for them? If I was working on their team, it would be all right. But because I'm on your team, I can't do it. You're going to get these kind of inconsistencies, and then people are going to complain about it not being fair. And then you're going to be worried about the law cases and whatever that come as a result of that. And you're going to have that kind of challenge. So I think ultimately, that's almost like pick your strategy, if you will. Okay. And then I think once you've picked your strategy, accept the consequences, but then make sure that your key leaders, and not just your HR people, I'm talking about your key leaders across your organization, know that, accept that, either buy into it or leave. Because if they don't role model it correctly, then actually ultimately it will not feel like you've managed it well.
Yeah.
But no matter which option you choose, by the way, you're going to be pissing off lots of employees.
Yeah. Not
So
easy.
this is also where, if I think about it from an HR lens, kind of want to be careful maybe not to overreact to engagement surveys on this topic, for example. No, we have to, I think, this requires a different type of sort of leadership interpretation and wisdom application rather than just we're hearing through whatever tool we're using, for an engagement survey through Office Vibe that people are really worried about X. I think those help you change manage the mood and the tone, but they don't really help you from a decision and action perspective as
Yeah.
much as we'd like to think maybe they do.
Yeah. Especially as it relates to this topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really
Thank
nervous. I
you.
think people are going to hate me after this one, Vicky.
No, Vips.
You've made me horrible in this one. I've been a bad guy.
No, our theme, Vips, is if only it could be that simple. And our goal is to share the complexities in all these things through a number of different levels. And I think you've done a fabulous job in doing that and helping people think that through. And so for the fabulous ones out there, appreciate the complexities in all of this. And
They love it. Not just that. I love it because it's not easy.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure everyone can get to the love it, but at least
I get
appreciate
it.
it.
No, I get it. I totally get it. I totally get it. But I think what I'm trying to get across is these are complex leadership issues. And a reason why we have maybe suboptimal leadership across so many of our companies and our organizations is because we don't have enough people that really love these kind of problems and therefore do a really good job of navigating them. We tend to have lots of leaders and executives that just want a quick answer and move on. And
Yeah.
I don't think
Or
that's the
they
future for our world.
or they pattern match to what they've done before because they know it worked for them
Yeah,
before. But
that's
they might
easy.
be
Yeah,
but they
path of
might
least
be
resistance.
but they might be tone deaf to what the organization needs, and that's causing an incorrect perception.
Or the market needs,
Or the market needs. Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
country needs.
Yeah. All right. So to wrap it up, appreciate the complexities and spend more time thinking through the implications at every level beyond simply the flexibility versus productivity through your own perspective. and look at the path that's right for you and what your organization needs, and be flexible. The most important avenue for growth is the golden thread. That is the nuanced path that you are going to find increasingly difficult to do if you are only remote. So find moments and ways to truly be with others so that you can understand the sentiment and the tone, and the perception is that you get it as well. And if you do that, you'll be able to navigate the nuances of whatever your organization is going through. And over the next few years, we're going to continue to see movement as everybody decides whether the environment is right for them, where they are in their time of life, and what they really ultimately want. But know that if you double down on being at home and doing everything remotely and having infinite flexibility, there will be financial and career implications and skill growth implications because of it. And so keep your eyes open as you think about the choices that are right for you. So with that, we're going to leave you here. Join us next time as we'll be digging into AI. Is my job doomed? We're going to give you a whole range of perspectives on that as well. And it's not all doom and gloom. So with that, thanks again. And Vips, was wonderful to be back with you.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.